Well, we've been through it. Welcome to the sixth and last part of this course, the sixth batch of readings and clips and things that I've put up for your consideration. These are just a few thoughts as to why I've done it. And one of the reasons I've done it is because I didn't want to leave the course with Section 5 on Becker and the denial of death. I didn't want to somehow make you think or leave the impression that I thought that was the only way to regard the way we cope with death or our feelings about death. It's always ambiguous, isn't it? And the first clip I'm giving you is from a great scene from a film from the 80s called The Hit, which is a very interesting film about death, starring the great Terence Stamp, who was a British actor, wonderful British actor, and John Hurt, another wonderful British actor. Not that all wonderful actors are British, far from it, but they're two wonderful actors, and it's a great film about death. It's about a gangster who rats out his friends and goes into witness protection. And he ends up in this beautiful villa in Spain. And finally, as he always knew, these two guys come to get him, to bring him back to be killed by the big boss when he gets out of jail. And what's really strange is he's kidnapped, and he has all these opportunities to run away, because the hitmen who come to get him are not really very competent. And he doesn't take any of the opportunities. He sort of kind of just actually helps them. And this older guy, played by John Hurt, Braddock, is puzzled. And finally, in this scene, he asks him, why didn't you run away when you had a chance? It's crazy. And he gives, and as you see, he gives his explanation that death is a natural thing, and everyone is going to die. And he had decided this was okay way for him to go, and that to keep running from it was not something that he was interested in doing, and that everybody has to be prepared. It's something that's going to happen to everybody, and moreover, it's nothing to be feared. It is something natural, as he says. It's as natural as breathing. And really, the movie has a lot more to it, and I would actually, if you could get a hold of it, you can probably find it on YouTube or the internet, or find it somewhere for a very low price to watch, and I would encourage you to, because there is a lot more to it. But that scene between them is quite moving, I think. Expression of someone who has accepted death with equanimity and peace, and it always struck me that it was very similar to the advice given by the ancient philosopher Epictetus in his Enchiridion, or Handbook. And I've given you a brief excerpt from that. The very opening of it, where he tells us, how to sort out the things that are in our control and the things that are not in our control, and then a more particular statement that mentions death. And the basic idea is that two basic ideas, that there are things in our control, and the things in our control, as opposed to the things that are not in our control, are our responses to the world, how we view the world, how we respond and react to the things that we can't control. And it turns out that most of what we can control are our feelings and thoughts and emotions, and the rest of it we have to sort of just accept. And one would imagine death as being one of those things that we simply have to accept, and we have to sort of respond to it in such a way as to preserve our peace and equanimity. As he says, men are disturbed, and disturbance is something that you really want to avoid, according to Epictetus. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning things. Death, for instance, is not terrible, else it would have appeared so to Socrates, the great hero of all philosophers. But the terror consists in our notion of death, that it is terrible. That is, death, Epictetus says, isn't terrible. It's our idea of death that's terrible. It's our notion of death that's terrible, and that we can control. That we can alter. We can give ourselves a better notion of it, a better response to it. It seemed to me that that's what Willie Parker, the man dressed in white in The Hit, was doing, or at least trying to do. I've given some other materials here. First, an article about the famous Elizabeth Kubler-Ross theory of grieving and coping with death. Both my understanding of that theory is it started with people who were terminally ill and how they coped with the knowledge that they were going to die soon, but then expanded to how we deal with the deaths of others and grieving. I wanted to include something on it because it seemed to me that the Kubler-Ross theory is so influential and so much a part of how many of us think about our deaths and the deaths of others that some mention of it should be made in this class, and also in this context with the other readings in this section. Our way of dealing with death rationally, of accepting it, of forming a better opinion of it, or forming a notion of it that would allow us to assimilate it into our lives, and really a rejection of the terror management theory, notion that there isn't anything fundamentally or intrinsically terrifying about death, that it is something that we certainly don't feel great about, that it's definitely sad and even traumatic, but finally that we can deal with it, in a rational way by working through these so-called stages of different stages. It is a very influential thing. I almost always avoid it in the classes I teach on philosophy and death, because I just don't think it's really. I have my doubts about it, but you tell me what you think of it. And then finally, I wanted to include, and maybe this would have been better in section 4, but the ending of a great film by Bob Fosse, the great choreographer and director. The last scene of his semi-autobiographical film, All That Jazz, which is how one guy goes out, or how one guy imagines his death. If you were a theater person and much of your life was about putting on a show, then maybe you imagine your death as one more number in the big show. Although the very last, if you stick with that, it is 20 minutes long, but I think it's great. If you stick with that scene to the end, you see that there's a rather ends on a note of realism, you might say. But I think, again, maybe the way that this guy, Bob Fosse, was thinking about his own death, and he did die not too long after he made this film, how he coped with his death, how he imagined the way that he would die as being appropriate to the way he lived. So, as we end, thanks for sticking with it. It was fun putting the course together. I wanted to make it suitable for an intercession course where, we're trying to get a lot of new ideas, assimilating a lot of new ideas, and getting a lot in our minds to think about in a very short time. And I tried to structure it in such a way to make that possible within the 3 weeks we have. So it's been very enjoyable putting the course together. I put together, this is about all I have, in terms of my references and the things that I think are interesting to look at. We could have gone into more depth, but we can always have gone into more depth. I hope you got something out of it and enjoyed the process of thinking and writing about these things. I look forward to going through the course with you, and that's it. Good luck. Thank you.